I'm just going to be honest. Pop culture lied to you. The concept of work-life balance is an attractive concept. You could call it like a beautiful mirage, but still fiction. And what we're going to be talking about is why this is actually making you miserable and how you can see through the mirage. Because the fact is that work-life balance is not really a part of a high performer's lifestyle. And pursuing it actually creates a handful of problems. First of all, let's define work-life balance. Balance in and of itself is just two forces pulling in opposite directions with equal power. And when you do work-life balance, work and life are those two opposite forces. And for most people, this is impossible because there's a few problems here. We want to take a look at the whole picture. The first one is time allocation, right? Every day, we all have the same 24 hours. The average person is going to spend about 6 to 8 hours a day of sleep, right? And then if you factor in any kind of typical 9 to 5 job, there's another 8 hours, right? And then if you're a solo or an entrepreneur, you're often putting in probably closer to 10 or 11 hours a day. And that's before factoring in any kind of commute or time spent advancing your career or your skills outside of the workplace. And to be honest, a lot of us end up taking our work home with us in one way or another. Either we're thinking about it when we're at home, or there's actual work that we need to be doing while we're technically off the clock, right? Disproportionately skews the time in favor of work. Now, the other thing is that the time is weighted differently depending on our perception of the work. So here's what I mean. Humans evolved to avoid pain and discomfort. So any kind of pain or negative experience has a tremendously higher weight than any kind of positive experience. And this is seen all over. One of my favorite studies is where they evaluated how a positive and negative comment impact people. And they found that it actually took 2.9 positive comments, so basically 3, to rule out a negative comment, to balance that out. It's actually called the Lasada ratio. And you see a very similar ratio or impact on advertising and political campaigns. It's actually one of the major contributing factors to all of the mudslinging that occurs in our society today. It's just that it has more of an impact and it communicates the need for change with fewer exposure and in a much faster way. Now you take that same Lasada ratio and you apply that to our work, and you can see how this work can weigh 3 times heavier if we have a negative perception of our work. And this can really mess with these imaginary scales of a work-life balance. Now, the fastest way to actually cure this is not spending less time at work, but actually to shift our perception of events. So that way, what we do at work is actually a positive effect, and that ratio that balances back out to where it's somewhere between 3 to 6 positive events for every negative event that occurs in a work environment. And that naturally creates a more positive work environment, whether that's working with coworkers or just the way that we perceive the things that we do on a day-to-day basis at work. Now, one of the other issues is that this also creates what I refer to as like a segmentation of life. Because if we actually do possess a negative balance or a negative perspective on our work, then what we end up doing is basically living for the weekend, right? We're splitting our life and have our work life, and then we have our home life, right? And you've probably heard of the old adage, chase 2 rabbits, catch none. And by splitting your life, you actually divide your resources and you divide your life. And that's really not something that an exceptional performer does. Now, my biggest pet peeve with this concept of work-life balance is that it creates this false image of scales where we have, of course, on one side the work and the other side is life, and that those need to be perfectly balanced and weighted and distributed. And the other problem is once that happens, the moment something adjusts or changes in our lives, it throws everything off balance and we have to scramble to recreate that balance. But what in reality life is it's not static at all. It's constantly changing. And this ideal of work-life balance, it's not like a picture where everything's just frozen in place. It's much more of a video where there's movement and change and adjustments, because that is life. Life is constantly changing. And once we accept that balance is not static and that things are going to constantly change, it provides the first real step towards peace. We can accept that, and we can actually shift our strategy and our focus towards achieving something that I like to call kinetic balance. So to really understand this concept of kinetic balance, what I find the most helpful is to imagine like learning to ride a bike. And I think for a lot of us, when we learn to ride a bike, we were probably younger. And so we may have forgotten what that was like. But I was actually just reminded of this a few years ago when I was learning to ride a motorcycle. Now, we probably all know when a bike's at rest, right, the only way that it can be held up is by some form of external support, like a kickstand, or if it's a tricycle where it has those 3 points, right, or a wall for it to lean on. But when the bike is moving, the balance actually comes naturally. And the hardest thing for me as a kid was just being able to push off the ground and balance the bike just long enough to get some momentum going by pedaling. Otherwise, when we start to slow down, it gets trickier to hold ourselves up without putting a foot down or crashing. And so the key is really to be moving forward in that single direction with enough speed to where the forward momentum actually creates and naturally balances the bike. Because now everything that we're doing is propelled by that forward force rather than two forces pulling in opposite directions. Now, that doesn't mean you can't turn or course correct. It just means that everything is done while going in a specific direction at that time. So how do you actually get this singular direction going in your life? I'm so glad you asked. There's a simple exercise that I use that's helped me a lot with this. Simple, but it does require some mental and emotional work. It comes from Warren Buffett, actually. It's his famous 5-25 rule. And what you need to do is actually create a list of the top 25 things that you want to accomplish in your career and life. When I did this, I actually just made a big old brain dump of a bucket list and a career list of anything I could think of. And then from there, I was able to pare it down and I came up with my list of 25. Now, once you have that list, go through and highlight or just identify the top 5. Then, once you've done that, all you need to do is cross out the remaining 20. I know, it's tough to cross out those 20. Probably 6 through 10 are near and dear to your heart. But I'll be honest, until you do, you'll be spread too thin to make an impact on those top 1 through 5. At least any kind of impact that you can feel proud of and feel fulfilled in. But I do have a tip for handling those 6 through 25, and I'll go through that here in a minute. So don't feel like we're tossing the baby out with the bathwater, but you need to get those top 5. So you got them? Good. Now, you need to identify the number 1 of those top 5. And for a lot of people, I think that comes naturally or intuitively. You may already know what that is. And if you don't, that's okay. I actually plan to create another video on how you can discover that for yourself. But first, I want to provide a framework for how you can visualize these top 5. And go figure, it's another car driving analogy, like cars. But think of these top 5 as a 5-seater sedan where you have a driver, which will be your number 1 priority, right? And then you have someone or something riding shotgun, which is going to be your number 2 priority. And then you have those 3 back seats, right? Obviously 3 and 4 are sitting by the doors with the most space. And then number 5 is squeezed in the middle. Because here's the deal. To be in a really comfortable position on the life, you really only want 4 or 5 priorities in that sedan. And they all need to be headed in the same direction that the driver wants to go. And yes, there's room for luggage in the back. But again, the luggage, those are the accessories of life, not the main events. The real road trip is happening in the cabin. So don't fuss over the baggage, right? That's a lesson that I actually had to learn the hard way, by the way. Most of this actually is. And speaking for myself, I was super tempted and even tried to squeeze my life into from a sedan to more of like a Lincoln Navigator and try to make like a 6th or a 7th passenger. But what I found is that I was actually making myself more miserable by going quantity over quality. Because the more I tried to do, the thinner I got spread and the less fulfilled I felt. And what I've actually found now is that I'm way more comfortable simplifying my life down to what I call my core 4. So I really only have these 4 priorities. Number 1, I have my life's work in bringing out the best in others and helping them become the best they can be. Number 2, becoming the best version of myself to impact others with. Number 3, the people in my tribe. And then number 4, my health and fitness. All of that, I just wrap inside of a rule and a reminder to make sure that I'm having as much fun as possible along the way. So maybe that's a 5th, but I really like to only think of having 4 priorities because then I can pretend like my sedan is a BMW M5 CS and has those really cool bucket seats in the back that only sit 2 people back there because that's a fun sedan. Remember, all of this though is to help us to establish that kinetic balance, that forward momentum that actually centers us automatically. And again, I was lucky to be reminded of this a few years ago when I had to relearn how to ride a motorcycle. I remember sitting there at the dealership with a class on a small 300cc engine bike, and our instructor pointed out that the heavier the bike, it's actually harder to maneuver, especially in slow turns. Like when you're just standing there and you can wiggle that thing back and forth, you can really feel the weight when you're going slow. And he warned us specifically to make sure that our first bike was in a weight class that we felt comfortable handling with 100% confidence, rather than having some big, heavy, or a massive engine bike like a 1000cc bike. And as the class progressed, I realized just how right he was. And I also felt like an idiot for having already bought a 1200cc engine bike that was way out of my depth. So please take the time to identify your top 5 and the driving force behind everything you do. It'll not only provide you with clarity, but also peace and just letting go of everything else. And I get it, though sacrificing those 6 through 25 items might seem like a loss right now, but I promise the return on that investment is going to give you the energy that you need to make those top 5 yield such high dividends and such fulfillment in your life that it's going to naturally bring peace and a positive contentment that most folks spend their whole lives looking for. And if you're still looking for a way to satisfy that 6 through 25 range, remember, they are the luggage rather than just being completely removed from the whole road trip, right? You're still going to make visits and get the occasional souvenir, but they're not why you took the trip in the first place. And for example, there's a lot of causes that I really care about, right? One of the big ones that I was big on as a kid, I loved animals, and in particular wolves. And there was a time when I really thought that my life's work was going to be becoming a zoologist and working with conservation efforts to preserve and help wolves kind of work their way off that endangered species list, which fortunately they have already. So that's cool. But what I actually settled on as I got older and kind of developed my mission and vision in life is really just sponsoring and partnering financially with a rehabilitation center down the road for wolves and other endangered predators. That way we can continue to preserve both our ecosystem and those really cool, unique animals. So that's just an example, but there are so many other great causes out there that we can all give ourselves to. And it's really hard to choose when we want to support them all. But I'm confident that you can find your own creative solution to satisfy those other opportunities in your baggage compartment. Also, if you really want to learn how you can better focus your resources and accomplish your goals to establish that momentum, check out this video.